Welcome to Fearless Females, where ambition meets resilience. Meet your guide, Lorie Jones, owner of Fearless Financial Advisors. Join her and remarkable women executives as they uncover the triumphs and transformative moments shaping extraordinary careers. Ready to be fearless? Let the journey begin.
Good morning, Fearless Females. I am so excited today. I'd first like to thank our sponsor, Fearless Financial Advisors. Go check out my website. I hopefully have it up by now. It's fearlessfinancialadvisors.com. And I'm so excited about the new branding. So have a look. Our guest today is Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, and I love it. The reason is she is all about talking about money. She has a new book coming out, and I think by the time this podcast is released, it will be out. And I believe there's a special link in the show notes for some special freebies with this book. But it's called Breaking Money Silence. And it's talking to women about kind of changing the narrative of talking about money, taking that taboo away from it, helping you understand that it's okay to talk, and not only okay, it's exciting and fun and amazing to be able to talk about finance and money. And it's not a taboo subject. It's not something that should be secret or hidden away, but something that women have a voice in and can participate in, knowing your own worth and having confidence in yourself and your financial knowledge. So obviously we are BFFs. And I love the idea too that she talked about surrounding yourself with people who lift you up. I had another guest not too long ago just talk about firing your inner critic and the idea that women particularly sometimes are pretty hard on themselves. And I love Kathleen's approach to this in just surround yourself with people who lift you up and breed positivity. In fact, that is my goal for 2025. I'm surrounding myself with positive, uplifting, growth-oriented people this year. So Kathleen is high on my list. I'm so excited for you to get to hear this episode. Let's get started. Good morning. I'm so excited today to have Kathleen Burns Kingsbury on with us. She is a coach, a consultant, and the author of Breaking Money Silence. So right up my alley, all of those things. Thank you so much, Kathleen, for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. I can't wait to break money silence with you.
So my very first question, and this is probably going to be a really easy one for you, is I'm a reader. I love books. What's your favorite book?
Well, believe it or not, I do like my book, but it's going to be someone else's book.
I never would have guessed, honestly. I was guessing yours. So tell me about it.
So there are two books that come to mind. And one is called The Financial Wisdom of Ebenezer Scrooge. It is in the field of money psychology, which is where I specialize. Mm-hmm. And it is written by Rick Kaler and Ted and Brad Klontz. And the reason I love this book is it is the book that I found when I discovered this whole field of money psychology. Mm-hmm. And so I love how simple it is because it's based on A Christmas Carol, but it talks about money scripts and how we think and feel about money. And it just was a book that was really an aha moment for me when I needed it. And certainly, 20-something years later, after reading it, we're going to talk a little bit about where I went from there. The second book that also was pretty pivotal for me, and both of these are older books, is Overcoming Under-Earning. And it's by Barbara Stanny. Her name is now Barbara Hewson. She got remarried, but it's a classic book about how women tend to undercharge and what you can do about it. And certainly when I started my business, I was one of those women.
I think not only do women undercharge in their business, but they also undervalue themselves as far as negotiating salaries and stuff like that. They don't negotiate what they're worth a lot of times. They undercharge themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been looking at women in their relationship with money and their psychology for a long time now. And yes, there is older demographics are typically not negotiating their salary, are undercharging. I still think that happens to a lot of entrepreneurs when they start. their business. It's kind of part of what you need to work through. But some of the research that's coming out recently is saying that Gen Zs and those following them are starting to actually negotiate just as much, if not more than men, which is awesome because that would be great if we changed that story.
Yeah.
But yes, it's something that I struggled with and something that I help women with all the time.
I love that your two suggestions kind of around your focus area of money psychology. I love that field. I like learning how we think about money and, some of those hidden things inside of our brain that we don't realize that we're doing, but are coming out in our lives. And sometimes to our detriment, sometimes to our, if you get them under control, sometimes to our benefit. But I love that. I'm going to put those on my list. I've got a stack this big. So,
Well, they're good ones. If you added a current one, I'd go with Money Psychology, which is the brand new one. And it literally, that's the name of it. When I say brand new, I guess it's about a year old now, but all really good books. And I find, if I do say so myself, I find my field fascinating, which certainly makes going to work a little bit easier.
I love people that love what they do. It always excites me and energizes me. So, Kathleen, tell me a little bit about your journey. How did you get where you're at today? Where did you start? And kind of what do you do?
Mhm. So I'll give you the short version. It was a very crooked path. I actually have been in the field of banking and finance. I've also been a clinical mental health counselor. And then in 2009, I created KBK Wealth Connection, which is my current consulting, coaching, and training firm. And what KBK Wealth Connection does is it takes everything that I love from banking and finance. So that's financial education, empowerment, everything I love from the field of psychology, which I find people fascinating. I find dynamics fascinating. And certainly our relationship with money
Mhm.
is something that is less explored. So that I found that interesting. And I combined the two. And that's when I started my company. And so how I got here, I'll go back to the book real quick, The Financial Wisdom of Ebenezer Scrooge. My husband and I can't even remember what year it is. It was probably 2006, 2007, decided to put an addition on our home. We lived outside of Boston at the time. And so we interviewed a bunch of contractors. I was a former FDIC bank examiner, so thought I could do no wrong financially. And we decided to hire our neighbor. Well, you flash forward 3 months, and what ended up happening was our neighbor started our project, our neighbor abandoned our project, and took a large sum of money from us. So there we were, my husband and I, his name's Brian, standing there thinking, how did this happen to us? I mean, we both are pretty business savvy. Brian probably is somebody who will give somebody a second chance a little quicker than I, which is a nice quality. But I got bamboozled too. And so in our shock and in our frustration, I started to look at, well, what was my role in this? And why is it, if I'm financially literate, did I get ripped off? And that's when I found this book, The Financial Wisdom of Ebenezer Scrooge. And that's when I stumbled on the field of money psychology. So at the time, I was working clinically and I was working in the field of eating disorders, which is really about women and how they feel about themselves, but the symptom is eating, not eating, or other types of behaviors.
Mhm.
Whereas with money psychology is often about how we feel about ourselves, but they're different symptoms and different behaviors. So it was right then and over the course of the next year, as we recovered from this financial loss, that I realized, whoa, I think this is a perfect field for me because it combines all my interests.
Mhm.
And certainly when I graduated from college in the 80s, there was nobody who was like a money psychologist.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that's kind of how I got here. And then I am so fortunate over the last 2 decades to be able to have published several books, to train advisors in the US and Canada, and also to work with a lot of entrepreneurial women and women advisors to help them ask and get paid what they're worth.
I think that's great. I love that. So, did you go to college for that? There was no degree. Like you said, there's no degree for money psychology. In fact, now there is, I think, but it was a long time in the coming. So, what did you go to college for?
So, most people that are in the field that are my age are self taught. And so I have an undergrad in finance.
Uh-huh.
I really thought I wanted to work on Wall Street and I wanted to be in banking and finance. And I think if I had ended up on the consumer side of things, like a branch manager or something like that, it would have enough people stuff that I might have really enjoyed it.
Hmm.
But I ended up on the auditing side. So I have the financial understanding. I can balance a bank, although I haven't done it in years. So
Yeah.
I know enough. I also understand the field. My master's degree is in counseling psychology.
Hmm.
And when I was working at the FDIC, again, not a linear choice or a typical choice, I started to study psychology at the master's level and decided to quit and get my degree and start a clinical practice. And
Hmm.
so I really thought at that point in time, I had pivoted and that was my last pivot and that was going to be it.
Hmm.
But then in about 2007, 8, I started to burn out. I love my clients, but it's a really tough industry to be in, mental health. And I started to look for what else could I do that I was passionate about where I was still helping people, but I could draw on this business side that I had. And that's when I discovered wealth psychology.
I love it. So you essentially like made up your own job description. Like you found your perfect spot and kind of built your job around that.
Yes, and I think anybody listening in, you can do it. I wasn't the first to the party, so to speak, but it was a very, very grassroots organization. And the authors that I mentioned at the beginning, especially Ted Klontz and Rick Kaler, were really on the ground floor. They talk about it in terms of financial psychology. I tend to talk about it in terms of unleash your true value coaching. But basically, yeah, we all just networked and figured it out and applied I was clinically trained, worked for 15 years. So I applied those concepts to how advisors would work with their clients, how men and women and couples would interact around money, and certainly just did the next thing that I thought made sense, not only for my heart, but also what I felt like the market would compensate me for. And I am very happy to report that it worked out.
That's great. I love it. Like I said, I love people that are passionate about what they do, who love what they do, and you can feel that coming off of you. So tell me a little bit, is there an investment that you've made in your career journey where you're like, "Oh, I am so glad I did that. If I hadn't have had made that investment in myself, I don't think I'd be where I'm at today."
That's a great question. I think it goes back to, well, I've done coaching throughout my life, not me coaching other people, but I'm hiring a coach.
Mhm.
And it goes back to the first coach I hired, Wendy Hansen. Shout out to Wendy Hansen because she's still out there coaching.
Mhm.
And basically, what I did was I called her up and I said, I don't know if I want to just be a therapist. And by no means am I minimizing, that's really hard work.
Yeah.
Do I just want to be a therapist or do I want to be a national speaker and trainer? I said, I don't know. And she goes, well, let's do some coaching around it. And the first thing she ever said to me was, what if for 3 months or 6 months, you just said, you know what, I'm going to try to be this national speaker. And you just decide, I had a part time practice at that time clinically. You put the therapy stuff aside and see what it's like. And she gave me permission to do it. And she also gave me permission to not do it forever. And that was super duper helpful. So we had a very great relationship. And so over time, the thing that I have invested in the most, other than website and marketing, is really when I feel like I need one or want one, I will hire a coach. So I've worked with Wendy in the beginning around business. I've worked with a speaking coach for 8 years to become a better keynote and workshop presenter. I've worked most recently with somebody who really helped me transition from pre-pandemic of being on the road all the time to what I'm doing now, which is much more virtual training and virtual coaching. So there's just pivot times where I thought it made sense. And I have to tell you, sometimes because I can be a little cheap, the sticker shock of coaching, sometimes you're like, whoa. But each time I invested that money in myself, it definitely has come back, at least double, if not triple, quadruple, because it's allowed me to get to that next level in my career and also get to the next level of where my revenue would be or currently is. Yeah.
I love that idea. I also have invested in coaches, and that idea of having someone outside with a little bit higher view kind of looking down and saying, "Hey, what if you tried this?" And I love that she said, just try 3 months, just try 6 months, just see if it works. Because we're so willing to just take that little step and
Yep.
see, hey, if it doesn't work, I always go, what's the worst that could happen? What's the worst that can happen? You can go back to your clinical and pick that back up again.
Well, and I did it 50-50. Like I had 20 hours clinical, so that's probably 2 or 3 days. And then I did the rest of the time on KBK Wealth Connection. And then at some point, I did have to make a choice in order to make it work. And it wasn't an easy choice because, you're helping people on an intimate level. But in terms of deciding what was going to be best for me and my career and what was going to make sense was to say goodbye to the clinical work and to kind of jump off a cliff in slow motion and figure out if this whole business thing was going to work.
I was going to say that sounds a little fearless to me. It sounds like you're just standing right up there at the precipice going, oh my gosh, I hope this works.
Well, and what is interesting for people who are thinking about doing that, and what happened for me is, so my first jump off a cliff was from a government job, right? FDIC, good pay, good benefits, could retire really young. I'm well past retirement age, I think, according to the FDIC. And I had to leave that. So that was the first jump when I went back to school and then went clinically, which obviously mental health counselors make a little bit less than what bankers make. It shouldn't be, but that's where this field is at.
Mhm.
So I had already done a jump. So when I made the next leap, it was still really scary, but it was a little easier because I was like, last time I landed on my feet, I think I'll land on my feet. And then you have to really remain flexible. You also should financially prepare
Mhm.
for 6 to 12 months, I'm not going to make any money.
Yeah.
You might make a little, but it's just natural to go down before you're then able to go up.
Just spin it up.
Yeah.
Kathleen, what is the worst advice that someone gave you? Did you ever get really bad advice and did you take it or did you not take it?
What comes to mind, I'm going to go just with what popped into my mind, is I, at some point during that transition from therapist to KBK Wealth Connection, hired a coach who, she wasn't ill-intended, but we ended up together creating this whole website and this whole, I don't even know what the message was, but this whole message. And instead of listening to my gut, I listened to her. And I ended up with this website. It probably was only up there for like 3 months. It wasn't me. It didn't resonate with me. It didn't feel good to me. But I thought intellectually, well, this is what I'm supposed to do if I want to be a speaker in this industry. And so I think the key takeaway for me is, yeah, there's rational analysis when you make a business choice. But I know I have a great gut sense, and I know a lot of women have a great gut sense. And if that is telling you something, listen to it. And so each time I've listened to my gut, I've made a good decision for myself and my business.
Mhm.
I have to say that's the one that stands out that was like, just, I don't know what I was thinking. So that's probably the worst decision or worst advice I got, even though she's a good coach that I listened to, cost me a little bit, but in the long run, it taught me to listen to my gut.
How is it not aligned with the way that you were authentically the website?
So it didn't really incorporate the psychology piece, and it was very salesy, which is ironic because now I'm coaching people to unleash your true value and earn more. And so
Yeah.
some of that is sales and business development. However, my program now is very, very different than how I was presented. It was almost like I bought into the idea that, okay, there's psychology in sales. And so I can just become a sales coach and speak on sales. And that's going to get me in front of, I don't even think it was for financial advisors, which was where I ended up. And so it just wasn't a good match. I'll tell you a quick story. So I had a former clinical client. You have to say goodbye to all your clients, which was the hardest part about closing a
I know.
practice because I worked with wonderful people. And this one client saw my new website and she emailed me and she, was really upset. She goes, I don't even know who that person is.
Mm.
And so it was upsetting that I was closing my practice. And so that was part of it for her.
Mhm.
But there was also part of it that she was spot on. Like, who was that person?
Mhm.
And I ended up figuring out over time that I needed to do a little bit more self-exploration and figure out what did the advisors need from me, or the banking space? Like, what did they need from me? Where was the gap?
Mhm.
And then how could I authentically fill that gap? And
Mhm.
what I'm so happy about is when I step off stage or when I work with somebody one on one, often the compliment I get is, "You're just so you. You're the same on stage as you are in person. You're just genuine." And I feel like that website wasn't genuine. And again, not a bad coach, just not the coach for me.
Yeah. And it's really hard. I've heard that, the idea of like trust your gut and be there and understand. That's really hard when you're younger. It's really hard to not take someone's advice who's doing this for a living or has been there and trust your own gut when you're so new.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that what ends up happening when you're in your, like, I find the 20s, early 30s, but 20s especially very challenging in terms of you're trying to figure out who you are, if you're a career person, what your career is going to look like, who you want to spend your time with, if you want to get married, if you don't. There's so much going on, like even just getting your own apartment. And so it's a time of a lot of change and uncertainty. I do think it's harder when you're younger to listen to your gut, but I also think that by hiring or working with, it doesn't have to be hiring, mentors or women who have done it before you, what you'll notice if you have a good mentor or a good coach, it isn't them telling you what to do. It's them asking you a series of questions to help you uncover what you think or feel you should do. And I think if we could do that a little bit more with younger women, that would be great. And I try to do that. Like, I'm a very part time college professor at Champlain University. I teach business strategy negotiation, and it's all online. I would love to see the students in person, but I don't because I got hired during the pandemic and that's where the spot was. But you can mentor somebody as a college professor or just as I'm an aunt and I have one niece. And so there's a variety of ways in which you can do it to help people start to trust their own instincts. But yes, I think it's hard early on. A little easier in your 50s, but not foolproof still, but still easier.
You still learn things about yourself for sure. And I like that idea of like questioning to bring out what they want to do because a lot of times, yeah, deep down they kind of do know who they were meant to be, or at least by their 20s, early 30s, they have an idea of what they're really good at.
Yep,
So,
and if you're confused about it, I think part of, what I would love to have done a little bit differently is not have so much angst about it. Like, I knew I wasn't in the right profession when I worked for the FDIC. Wasn't that I wasn't good at it, wasn't that I didn't get promoted. Something didn't feel right. Like, other people seemed to be really jazzed about it and I wasn't. And so instead of having so much angst and feeling like what's wrong with me, I wish that I could have just thought there's nothing wrong with me. It's just I might want something a little bit different.
mhm. So, if you could look back on your professional journey and you could see a spot where you're like, oh my goodness, if I knew then that all the things that I know now, I totally would have handled that situation differently. Is there something you can think of?
Yes. I'm trying to think of how to frame it because it's happened in different ways. Because I'm somebody who is intuitive and somebody who enjoys talking to people about their feelings, I tend to be also a very feeling oriented person. And so, certainly early on in my career, taking things a little too personally or even being kind of reactive, like for instance, you get an email and instead of sitting and being like, okay, I have feelings about that email, I'm going to take a walk or I'm going to get back that tomorrow morning, or I am like, I'm an action oriented person. So it's like,
Mhm.
there are times where I would send back an email that now I would cringe if I think about it. Like, all I needed to do was spend an hour away from that email, and I could have done something that I think would have been more emotionally intelligent. So I would say those are the things. The other thing is, and it also goes with emotions, is, and I was coaching a woman the other day on this, is, when you don't make a sale, whether it's a speaking engagement, a large contract with a consulting firm or something else, in the beginning, it was so hard to hear no. And now I'd rather get to know sooner so then I can move on to the next. It feels less personal than it used to. And it feels more like, okay, I can see it from their, side of the table and why this might not work right now for them. So really being able to just be less reactive embrace when something doesn't work, and learn from it as opposed to beat myself up about it. Those are the things.
I love all those things. I wish I was 100% on them. The idea of getting to know sooner rather than taking it personally, it's hard. That's a
It is
hard
hard.
skill. So, but I love it.
Well, and what I encourage people to do is, yeah, I'm not saying don't have feelings about it. I mean, that if I stuff my feelings, I'm not a fun person to be around. So it's like giving yourself space, but instead of, grieving it for a week, maybe you talk to your girlfriend, you journal about it, you pout about it a little. Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's a day, but don't let it drag on forever. Because if you adjust your mindset and you're able to bounce back and be more resilient, you're less miserable. Your business is more successful, but it's a skill you have to learn. So if
Mhm.
you're in that or occasionally get in that, that means you're human. And so it's just, trying to tweak a few things to figure out how to shorten that process. But I think we definitely should feel rejected or whatever we're feeling because
Mhm.
it stinks. It doesn't feel good for someone to be like, no, I don't want to work with you.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Just maybe putting a boundary there between taking it personally and, yeah, getting in your feelings for weeks and weeks rather than
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of learning and moving on.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah. Boundaries around how much energy, time, and space is actually going to be useful to process it versus then it becomes kind of not useful and destructive and distracting.
Yeah. Kathleen, if you could go back and talk to yourself at the beginning of your journey when you were like 20, 21, 22, 23, somewhere around there, what would you tell her?
I would tell her that she was worth it, that she didn't have to look a certain way, didn't have to act a certain way, and didn't have to fit in to be worthy.
Mhm.
I struggled a lot in my teens and 20s. I actually had an eating disorder because I tried to fit into what I thought everybody else wanted me to be. And so I would tell that young girl who was probably very afraid to be herself, that no matter who she is, she's worth it.
Well, that leads really well into the next question, which is what scared you the most when you started on your journey? And you can take like any phase of your growth. And does it still scare you?
So let me just say one thing that I think is important. I fully recovered from my eating disorders in my no, in my like late 20s because some
Okay.
people don't
Yeah.
feel, might be curious about that. So
Yeah. No.
and I think that experience allowed me to develop emotional intelligence. It allowed me to really know who I am and while I don't wish it on anybody, I did get to the other side.
And that is you can't emphasize enough how hard that is. Like
Mhm.
I've had nieces and kids and other women in my life that have suffered from some of those things, and it's so difficult. It's so difficult to recover from, to come out of. You need the help and be so proud of yourself for having done that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I am. That other person, it's kind of like she's over here and it feels very disconnected from who I am now in a positive way. But certainly, I do believe in full recovery. And I do think that anybody out there who's struggling, help is the way. I mean, that's why I specialized in eating disorders for 15 years. I think you really can get help and get better. With that said, certainly being scared is something I'm familiar with. I would say that one of the scariest things I ever did in my career, and at this point, I was speaking, it was my first main stage keynote. So I don't know, maybe 1,000 people in the audience. And I was hired to do a 45-minute keynote by a sponsor. And I can just remember how long that day was to get to that presentation, how I hardly remember being on stage. I mean, there are pictures, so I know I was up there. I did okay, and I got off stage, and I survived. And even though speaking and keynote speaking scared me in the beginning, there was a part of me that just really wanted to do it. And so each time I did it, I became less and less scared. It would be a lie to say that if I do a keynote presentation that at times I'm not excited to get on stage or maybe a little nervous about the engagement at some point in prep for it, but I've learned to manage that fear.
Hmm.
One of the things that has helped me is I am a pretty avid alpine skier and in the summer, a mountain biker. And
Mhm.
so there's a lot of like, challenges, whether it's going down a double black diamond trail or whether it's hitting a rock and falling down and having to get back up if I'm mountain biking. All of those things have taught me that, even if I fall on my face in front of a speaking audience, I can get back up. I can continue doing what I'm doing. And so by embracing kind of that unknown, I'm less scared. I'm just like, you know what? And usually I'm pretty good at pivoting. Something goes wrong, I make a joke out of it.
Mhm.
And over time, like anything, public speaking is a muscle. And so that's the thing that used to scare me the most that really doesn't anymore, but I still do get a little bit of anxiety before a big engagement. And I think that's good. That makes me
Yeah.
better and it shows that I care.
It kind of feels like a lot of times if you're not just a tiny bit scared, maybe you're not pushing your boundaries.
Yep. And I always do that. It's so funny because I always do that naturally. So whether it is skiing, whether it's I took up horseback riding when I was 50.
Mhm.
And it
Congratulations.
yeah, why not? I just was always interested and while that may sound easy to anybody who rides and started as a kid or even started later and was a natural rider, I was not a natural rider. So it was I'm not kidding you, 2 summers to learn how to trot, like not a natural rider. But I conquered it and I faced that fear. And yes, I wanted to quit at a certain point when this 14-year-old just showed up the first day of lessons and just like started trotting. I was like, you've got to be kidding me.
Where is the justice in this universe, huh?
But what I realized is all my other sports and everything I do in life, including my business, I push, push, push through. And with a horse, you push, and the horse is like, I don't think so. So I learned a lot from that experience. So I keep kind of wanting to do something new. Otherwise, I get bored. So I think that's what keeps me going as an entrepreneur and as a person.
I like that. Kind of keeping yourself on the edge of challenging, not terrified, want to crawl, in a hole somewhere and hide, but challenging constantly.
Challenging. And I also think as I have gotten to this phase of my life and my career, I also have allowed myself, which can be scary in a different way, to take more time, to allow myself space to enjoy, to take Wednesday mornings to go skiing with a girlfriend. That would have terrified me in my 30s. I would have thought, well, I'm going to fail. And now I
Mhm.
think, oh, I'm just going to feel more creative and energized on Thursdays. So it's fear comes in all different shapes and sizes.
Yeah, it does. And I resonate really well with the idea of like, it's scary to stop working. Like, it's
Yeah.
scary to take time out and build time in for thinking or dreaming or just being. And that's scary at this stage of life. So,
Yeah. And I think when you're career oriented, and we also live in a culture, depending on your industry too, where it's like being busy is valued. So if all of a sudden you have free time, it's gotten kind of convoluted that somehow that's a bad thing, when in fact, that's where creativity happens. That's where we reset. That's where we connect with people. There's so much that's good about that.
mhm.
But as a driven person, that's a lesson I had to learn a little bit later. And I do think having a global pandemic, while I don't wish it on anybody, allowed me to slow down enough to be like, this isn't so bad.
Maybe I could do this a little bit. Not all the time, but
Not all the
sometimes.
time.
So, did you face any unique challenges through your journey because you were a woman?
It's an interesting question because
Mhm.
I work a lot with women in male dominated industries to help them navigate that. I would have to say yes, but I'm also fortunate in that I always worked externally. So I could either not work with that client, I could distance myself. But I am sure, I'm trying to think of a concrete example. I am sure, and in fact, this has happened where they're considering you for speaking engagement and say it's the keynote for because they budget for keynote and it's a keynote presentation and then they ask you to do it for free or just for travel and then you find out that the male speaker is being paid top dollar and you're like, wait a second. And that was an aha moment that I had probably 15 years ago, where I thought I have to do a lot better advocating for myself and making sure that my fees are competitive. And so I think there is a way in which being a female in the financial industry, whether it's my role or actually being an advisor, there is still a lot of bias. And some of it's overt and some of it's pretty covert. So it's unfortunate. I wish it wasn't there, but I definitely think that's impacted me in terms of just who I could work with, the level of respect I potentially got. But I never let it get me down. I also think there probably were times when being a female might have been an advantage.
Hmm.
I actually was the first keynote speaker that was a female in 2015 at a
Hmm.
bankers conference,
Wow.
which I didn't know at the time, which is both horrifying because it was 2015 and also kind of nice. Like, okay, I'm breaking through a ceiling here. But yeah, I think it's hard to be a woman in a male dominated industry, but we can't give up because I really feel like we have the skills to balance it off what people who identify as male have. And we have some unique abilities, and I'm for inclusive, diverse, like, I'm by no means am I anti-guy,
Right.
but I do think some of the bias that's out there is, and I'm a white woman, so I can only imagine and have certainly talked to friends who have similar careers that are Black or women of color, and their bias is even stronger.
Yeah, minorities a lot of times
Mm.
deal with even harder issues sometimes than we do. But I think it's important, though, that you do get up on that stage because as the person who goes to those conferences and sees the keynote speakers, like especially in financial services, you see a steady stream of people that don't look like me up on the stage. And it's nice to have and see successful women and see them be successful and pass that on, and then you can look and say I could be like her one day. So
Yeah. And so, with that in mind, the thing that I would encourage people to do is hang out with other women who can celebrate your success.
mhm,
In addition to coaching, I have managed for the most part to surround myself with other business women who may do something similar to what I do, or maybe even it's different, but we're lifting each other up. And unfortunately, that isn't how all women feel about it. And, if you've heard of the queen bee syndrome, where somebody is kind of like, hey, there's only one spot, I want it. Hopefully that's dying with the newer generation. But I really found that when I celebrated with my girlfriends and with my colleagues in the industry and out of the industry, when I raised my rates, when I landed a big engagement, when I shifted gears and launched a new website for coaching, that support of a female community around you, men too. I have great men in my life as well, but that really made a huge difference
mhm.
because I really believe we shouldn't be bringing each other down. We should be lifting each other up. There's enough to go around.
Oh yeah, that abundance mentality
Yeah.
that yeah, sure there's only one seat at the table now, but imagine when we have 3. Let's make that happen.
Well, and sometimes there are three. We just think about it in old fashioned terms. And that's where I think the next generation coming up and a lot of your listeners can keep in mind that. And I think they already do because their generation is just
Yeah, they're
very
good.
much more inclusive. And I'm an old Gen Xer, almost boomer, than we were. And so, yeah, I think we need to surround ourselves with a whole community that's going to celebrate success, not to try to tear us down and be jealous of it.
Yeah, I love that. Amen. Kathleen, what is the thing that you are most proud of?
Oh, that's a hard one. I'm gonna well, I'm most proud of me for sticking in here for so many years and making it work and listening to myself and to strategically growing a business that I think has been quite successful. I think if we have to pick something concrete, I would say I'm most proud of publishing so much thought leadership in the space and having an influence as somebody who is a published author. My book, Breaking Money Silence, which was my fifth book and it was published in 2017, is being re released next year or this year, 2025. And it's the book I'm most proud of. And I think it's the reason I'm most proud of that particular book is because not only is it well researched and it speaks to a problem in the industry and offers a solution to clients as well as advisors, it also comes from the heart. Like if
Mhm.
you look at my first couple of books, they're more up here.
Mhm.
Breaking Money Silence was from the heart.
Mhm.
And so I think that if I had to say something concrete is the book I'm most proud of, but ultimately I'm most proud that I'm still hanging in there. I'm still getting hired. I'm still creating something that I think is needed in the marketplace and still feeds my soul. And while that's less concrete, I think that's having an impact is certainly
Yeah.
something that's always fueled me.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea. We are all, a lot of times I'll ask that question. And if they have kids, women will say, I'm so proud of my
Yeah.
kids. And I
Yeah.
think it comes from the same space. Like we're proud of what we've created, we're proud of what we've put out in this world. We're proud of the impact that it's making in the world. And it doesn't matter whether it's, a book or a kid or a career or
Yeah.
a product or anything. Like we're so proud of that idea being in the world and growing and gaining and making the world a little bit better. So I love that.
Yeah, and quickly, I've actually received feedback from people who have seen me speak, or I've trained or taught them because I'm very open that I don't have kids. I have a furry daughter, Ashley. I know that's very,
They
very
take just as
different.
much time, about half the time, I think.
No, I don't think so. But, and so that was, my husband and I were in the fortunate position that that was by choice, not by circumstances.
Mhm.
And I have been public about that. And I have had some young women recently, I would say in the last 5 years, come up to me afterwards and say, thank you.
Mhm.
Because I think it's a wonderful thing to be a mother. Most of my friends are mothers. I
Yeah.
also have friends who have chosen not to be. And I think one of the things that's really nice about where we're at as women supporting each other is we don't have to all make the same choice for it to be valid. And so, just thinking about that, it's a hard job you moms have. And I'm glad I didn't sign up. I'm glad other people did. And I'll be the fun, cool aunt as
Yeah.
long as I can.
I love that. I do. I love that. And I agree with you. I think there's space for all different kinds of creation and decisions and stuff like that. I think that I truly do think like some women have fur babies that are their whole lives. And some people have ideas and books and like the fun auntie or something like that. Like we give back in so many different ways. It doesn't just have to be one thing. It doesn't have to be this one way. It can be so many different ways.
Which is awesome that that's part of your message, because that's really important for women of all ages, but certainly younger women to hear as well.
Yeah, I agree. Their lives don't look like mine did, and I love that for them. I think that's so exciting to watch. Any advice for a young lady who's just starting down this path that you are so successful at to help her be successful like you?
I think one is to surround yourself with support. That doesn't mean that you're not capable of doing it. But the reason that I've been successful for the last couple of decades is because I surrounded myself with support in terms of, mentors and coaches, which we've already talked about, but delegating and surrounding myself with people who are better at other things than I am, such as like technology. I have a virtual assistant that does technology and, I can manage this podcast, but beyond that, I get in trouble. Uh, and to also, I would say, accept that you're not always going to know. Trust that you will figure it out, but you're not always going to want to know. And that is hard for some of us, but just know that just means you're human and you're working towards something. It's easy to say at this stage of my life because I look back and it all makes sense, but it didn't make sense when I was going through it. So stay true to yourself, I think is the bottom line.
Yeah. And living in that space where you're not sure what's coming next is a little scary sometimes.
I call it the muck. And any coach that's ever worked with me knows I'm not good in the muck. But I do know there's a purpose to the muck. And I do know you will eventually figure it out. And pushing yourself and beating yourself up and trying to figure it out doesn't really get you there any quicker. It actually, if you lean into it a little bit, I'll probably be telling myself the same thing when I'm like 80, but
Yeah.
I'm working on it. And I think that's something that I'd like to share with the younger generation.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathleen, for showing up and sharing your experiences and sharing your journey. I've just really appreciated it. I've learned something. I always do. And I'm so excited. And I'm excited about the book suggestions you gave in your book. It's coming out in February.
January 14th, 2025 is the official published date. And it's just Breaking Money Silence, the second edition. It will be available on my website, which is kbkwealthconnection.com. And the thing that's different about the second edition from the first is there's a bonus chapter, which is specifically for women. So people who are listening in today, around how you identify, communicate, and unleash your true values so you can earn more.
Oh, I love
I want to help women be able to charge what they're worth. And I know sometimes that isn't always so easy.
Yeah, sometimes it's a little hard. So if we have a listener that wants to get in touch with you, ask questions,
Sure.
take advantage, how do they do that?
So the best thing to do is to go to my website. Again, it's KBK. Those are my initials, Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, kbkwealthconnection.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I know it's a long name, Kathleen Burns Kingsbury on LinkedIn. And what I'm going to offer to anybody who's interested in the book is I will get you, for the show notes, a special link that will get you 10% off the Breaking Money Silence book. So if people do want to take advantage of that resource, they can. And for those that may not want to invest yet, I'm going to also offer a handout that's going to help you prepare for a money conversation, because I think preparation is something that is key. So hopefully out of one of those resources, it can help, and feel free to reach out. I love having conversations and talking to women about breaking money silence.
I love it. Thank you so, so much. I appreciate it, Kathleen.
Oh, thank you.